What's up guys, Josh here, and today we're going to be talking about the HIFIMAN Edition XX, the Massdrop HIFIMAN collaboration. And my goal is to tell you whether or not I think it's worth the asking price. As always, there's going to be links in the description where you can check this out or anything else I talk about in this video. But right before we get into that, I want to send a huge thank you to the very special patron, Rob, who sent this out for a review. Thank you very much, Rob. You kick some ass, buddy. Okay, so first we're going to be talking about the build, and the build is a bit of a Frankenstein device. Of the headphones with this ear shape, this is actually my favorite build, and I'm going to explain why. But first, some just general bits about it. So the ear cups themselves, including these, this grill here, it's all plastic. So it does kind of have a plasticky feel. You can kind of hear it crackling whenever you put a little bit of pressure on it. The ear pads are an actual ear shape, which I love this style of ear cup from HIFIMAN. I find it incredibly comfortable. Not everybody does, but I love it. The ear pads are kind of the standard kind of a hybrid pad where they're pleather on the outside, cloth on the part that actually touches your head, and then a perforated leather on the inside. And this ear shape is shared by other high-end headphones from HIFIMAN like the HE1000, the Edition X, the Aria, and the Ananda, which I will actually have a comparison with the Aria and the Ananda against this headphone in a future video, so subscribe if you're not already. Now, while it does share some of the DNA from those higher end headphones, it also shares a little bit of DNA from lower end headphones like the HIFIMAN HE4XX. Pretty much identical, just rebranded for the Edition XX versus the 4XX. Now, this is actually the reason why I like this more than the HE1000X or the HE1000, the Aria, the Ananda, the Edition X, all of those. I actually like the one the most because of this headband. The clamp force of it is a little bit stronger, and these metal ear brackets here are made of metal. And for this specific headband, it actually fits my head perfectly. Not everybody is going to like it. It's not going to fit everybody's heads. I think because of the shape of it, it may not be exactly comfortable on the top or the sides of everybody's head. For me, it is really comfortable, and for me, it's a preferred option, but not everybody's going to appreciate it. So if you've tried the 4XX and don't like the fit, this fits just about identical, just a slightly different pad feel. Now, real quick, speaking of that, I do want to shout out again these little knit pads. A friend of the show, Matt, actually caught my eye to these knit pads, and they basically snap on top of the headband. I know that some people were having size issues with the 4XX, and these ear cups are actually a little bit higher up than they are on the Edition XX. And the Edition XX actually fits a little bit lower. So if you need a bit of extra height, this headband is going to be perfect for that. And it's a little bit more comfortable even still than the stock headband, even for me. So regarding the actual feel of the build, because of this headband, it just feels more premium, in my opinion, than the higher end actual premium versions of this, which I guess works out. The ear pads are detachable and they're very large, as you can see, but they are proprietary towards the system. And, if you take a look inside and look at the driver, you can see that, this isn't as premium as some of their higher lines, but at this price range, it is to be expected. It still looks good, but, they're using glue that's a little less pretty, and it doesn't have a kind of a phaser array that something like the Aria has. Now, regarding some of the specs of this device, it is a 20 ohm headphone, but it does have a sensitivity level of 93 decibels, which is on the lower end of sensitivity, which basically translates to an amplifier is recommended. You will want to push a little bit of juice in here. A lot of people are going to see the 20 ohm impedance and kind of think that's pretty low, and it is, but that sensitivity level basically dictates how loud you are going to get given a certain amount of power. And that means that you are going to want to push a little bit of juice in here. Now, speaking of amplification, this headphone was actually tested on a Topping DX7S, a Mayflower Arc, a Mayflower O2 amplifier, and of course my trusty THX AAA 789. It does respond pretty okay to most of those amplifiers. I would say the only one that wasn't, that seemed to have a little bit of issues with the S range, actually. The S range seemed to be brought up a little bit more, was the Topping DX7S. That might have something to do with the output impedance of the Topping or something like that. But all tested except for, the Mayflowers. It was tested out of the balanced option. The balanced cable does not come with this. The one I was using on here was from Periopt. Huge shout out to Periopt for providing a cable that fits on here. So for amp pairing, I'm going to say it's going to be okay for almost everything that you have. Even on the DX7S, I noticed a little bit of change, but I didn't really think it was like a big problem. It didn't really seem to affect the bass response that much. It didn't really seem to affect the spatial capability or the dynamics that much. It was more just that little bit of kind of a boost in the slightly higher vocal frequencies, which to me, for this specific headphone, wasn't a massive problem. All right, so regarding the sound, the simplest way I can put this, and the way that I think makes the most sense is going to be applicable to the most amount of people, is it's kind of like the big boy mature version of the HE4XX. If you think of it as like an upgrade path of like, hey, if you've got this headphone, or if you like this headphone but you want the next level, this is the next level to that. And there's a couple reasons why. I will compare directly in just a second, but for now, let's just talk about this headphone in a bottle and how it sounds. Starting off with treble, the treble is good for the price range. It's not great, it's not class leading, it's also not as forward as some other HIFIMANs like the Sundara, for example. The Sundara I actually consider to be a kind of a bit more detailed in the top end than the treble is on here. The treble here is slightly recessed comparatively, but that slightly smoother characteristic, it kind of actually reminds me a little bit of an LCD2C. Now in the $600 price area, if you go down a little bit to the 1990s, I think the 1990s beat it out for treble. If you go up a little bit to the LX, I think the LX also beats it out for treble. So that's going to be one of the downsides, although you may appreciate kind of the slightly lower level that this is coming in at. There is actually a little bit of a peak. I haven't tested this and I haven't looked at any frequency response graphs, but I want to say it's probably around the 8 to 10K area. There's just a little bit of a hike there. It's certainly not to an unpleasing or overly shouty degree, but it is kind of a little bit like, all right, there's a little bit of hotness there, but not a ton. It's definitely not sibilant or anything like that. Mid-range is very pleasing because of how forward this headphone is, and it is a very forward kind of all-encompassing in your head type of sound, which I gotta be honest, when I came into this, after hearing the Aria, I thought this is gonna be a very wide sound. It's not at all. I was hoping, personally, that this is gonna be like a, like 90% of an Aria for $600, but it's not. It's just not the same caliber. It's not the same type of sound, certainly not the same delivery. But that doesn't inherently mean that it's bad. It's just different. So the lower end of the mid-range is pretty girthy, and it has a good amount of body, and it definitely has a bit of kind of lusciousness to the sound there. Now, when you get to the upper end of the mid-range, it's odd. It can actually sometimes feel a little bit like I know when I talk about timbre, everybody freaks out, but the timbre characteristics of instruments and vocalists actually kind of get somewhat closed down and pinched into the same general type of sound in the very upper end of the mid-range going into the lower treble frequencies. I was listening to John Legend, and then I switched to Sam Smith, but those two vocalists who I don't really think sound anything alike, in certain areas of their upper singing frequencies kind of get pinched and sound quite similar, and they just didn't seem very separated, which is kind of interesting. Now, the other aspect to the vocals, which overall, I'm going to focus on a couple negatives here, but overall, in terms of the vocals, I actually really do like the vocal performance on here. For vocalists that can't sing perfectly, it is a little punishing, because it can really tell you when something is just not, when they're not singing quite correct. They can pick that up very easily. But one of the other aspects of the vocals and the kind of the downside to how this delivers sound is that really busy vocal songs that, and by busy I mean things where the background music is brought up a little bit in volume, the vocals tend to lose any kind of isolated characteristics, and you don't really feel like you're listening to a vocalist separated from the background. You kind of just feel like the vocalist gets, sucked into the background almost. A good example of this, to bring up Sam Smith again, is, I believe the song is called Like I Can. That song on a really good headphone can keep the separation. As busy as the background gets and as loud as the background music gets, it can still separate. This loses that separation a little bit. But in 9 out of 10 circumstances, that's not really an issue. It's just with that one song that happens to be mixed that particular way, just didn't sound very good. For separation, of course. Tonally, it was all great. It was all good there. Now, bass response. Depending on which side of the fence you sit on, you know, for a planar, it's got good amount of bass. It's got a good amount of meat on its bones, but it doesn't quite hit as low and as hard as certain other planars. Now, for the Sundara or the 4XX, for example, it's got more than that, and it does, you know, there's a little bit of a slope, kind of slopes up to about 100, and then 100 to 120 is about the highest that the bass gets. But the slope down is very gradual, kind of like the Sundara, except the Sundara is a little bit steeper. This is a little bit more, it doesn't kind of roll like that. It's more just a flat, you know, kind of straight line downwards. Whereas the 4XX, for example, does kind of start to roll a little bit. So where I'd place this is like, if you're a self-described bass head, like if you really dig bass, you're probably gonna want to look somewhere else. If you like kind of bass being mixed in with the rest of your music in a pretty balanced way, this is a good option. It's not the best in terms of bass response in this price range, but it is good. So imaging and soundstage is, those are two more weak points of this headphone. The imaging, it gets beat out by quite a large margin from something like the DT1990s, which had their own benefits and drawbacks, but in terms of imaging, they kick this thing's ass. Sound staging is also fairly weak. It doesn't really extend beyond the boundary of the headphone very well. It's not super great for that either. So you're kind of getting, you know, not everybody likes a super three-dimensional sound. Some people are okay with the more limiting sound staging capabilities that this offers. But the sound is a little bit two-dimensional. It doesn't, you know, extend super far out compared to other $500 to $1,000 options. Now, one thing that was really good, and I actually didn't notice this until I was actually gaming, is right and left orientation seem to be stronger than most other headphones. It seems to be able to kind of tell you, like, if something is left, you really know it, and if something is right, you really know it. But it's not far, it's just, you know, hard right, hard left, and then kind of your center, you know, ball of sound. All right, so before the conclusion, let's talk about a couple comparisons here. So I said before that it was basically like a grown-up version of the 4XX, or like the Big Brother or something like that. I really think that's the best way to describe this. Short of soundstage, everything about this headphone, this just does a little bit better. The bass response is a little bit higher. The mid-range is a little bit sweeter and richer and a little bit more forward. The treble response is, there's dips and peaks on both, but the treble response I would say is a little bit more even and a little bit more complete on the Edition XX. Now, when you're talking about similar sound signatures to this, you know, if you're taking the law of diminishing returns into account, yes, the 4XX is the better value. In my mind, there's no question that the Edition XX is a better headphone. It's just, you know, are you willing to pay the extra $400 to get, you know, something that is, you know, I consider it to be probably about, you know, 30% better on this. It just does, everything is just brought up just a little bit more on the Edition XX. Now for another lower tier headphone from HIFIMAN, the Sundara. This was an interesting comparison because they actually do sound quite similar in certain areas. The Sundara soundstage is better. A lot of headphones actually soundstage better than these do. But the Sundara has kind of a, I think some people might consider it an overly clinical sound. It's super analytical, it's super fast, and that's pretty much how everything about this headphone sounds. The bass sounds fast, the mid-range sounds fast, the treble sounds fast, and it gets caught up in that kind of, that characteristic. Everything about this sounds really, really sprightly. And then this kind of takes its time a little bit more. It's kind of a little bit more laid back. It's not so aggressive, but it is also quite detailed in certain areas. I'd consider it a detailed headphone, but I think if you were to compare to other price ranges or other headphones in this price range, I would say, you know, it's not astoundingly more detailed than anything else in the price range. It's kind of just middle of the road for detail. And I think that kind of leads me into the conclusion here. This headphone, you know, if you like the 4XX sound signature and you're looking for the next step up, this is the premier next step up from that. When it comes to getting into the realm of kind of the lower tier of hi-fi headphones, right? The lower tier of real high-end audiophile headphones. This is a good option. I don't think it knocks other players off the board, but it does allow for a lot of lateral movement in the kind of $500 to $700 field. It's a good player. I just don't think it's kind of the king of this price range. So I think that's going to wrap it up, guys. I will leave links to everything that I talked about. Also some other comparable options to this in the description down below. I'd appreciate if you check that out. Hit the like button if you liked it, subscribe if you loved it. And my name is Josh, signing off.